I stood alone in a honeymoon suite that cost more than my car, staring at the empty king-sized bed draped in rose petals and realized my husband wasn't coming back. The text message on my phone felt like a punch to the gut. "I can't do this, I'm sorry, I'm at the airport." 3 sentences. That's all I got after 5 years together, after planning this wedding for 18 months, after promising forever just 72 hours ago. My hands shook as I sank onto the edge of the bed, the white rose petals crushing beneath me like my carefully constructed life. 26 years old, legally married for 3 days, and completely abandoned in a luxury ranch resort in Montana, a place Derek had insisted on booking because it was romantic and different. Now I understood. It was remote, isolated, the perfect place to leave someone stranded while you flew back to San Francisco to be with, who I didn't even know. The text didn't say, "I should have cried." Everyone expects you to cry when your marriage implodes before the honeymoon even properly begins. But I just felt numb, hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me feel human. The worst part, a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that I'd seen this coming. The distance in Derek's eyes during the ceremony, the way he'd barely touched me on our wedding night, the forced smiles in every photo. The knock on the door startled me out of my spiral. I wasn't expecting anyone, room service maybe, but I hadn't ordered anything. I couldn't even think about food. "Housekeeping," a voice called, deep, warm, with a distinctive Western drawl that didn't match the usual hospitality staff tone. I opened the door and found myself looking at a man who seemed entirely out of place in the upscale resort. He wore dusty jeans, worn leather boots, and a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. A cowboy hat sat low on his head, shadowing eyes that I immediately noticed were the color of honey in sunlight. He looked about my age, maybe a year or two older, with a few days of stubble along a strong jawline and an expression of genuine concern that made something in my chest tighten. "Sorry, wrong room," he said, but he didn't move. His eyes took in my face. I must have looked like hell, and his expression shifted. "You okay?" "Fine," I lied automatically, my voice cracking on the single syllable. He tilted his head slightly and I saw him glance past me into the room, at the rose petals, the champagne on ice, the romantic setup that now felt like a cruel joke. When his eyes came back to mine, they were soft with understanding. "You don't look fine, you look like someone just kicked your heart into next Tuesday." The unexpected gentleness in his voice combined with the ridiculous phrase made something crack in my carefully maintained composure. "My husband left," I heard myself say. "We've been married for 3 days, he just left." "Jesus," the cowboy breathed. He took off his hat, revealing dark brown hair that was slightly too long falling across his forehead. I'm real sorry." We stood there in the doorway, complete strangers, and I felt more seen by this man in 30 seconds than I had by Derek in months. "I'm Ethan," I said, not knowing why I was introducing myself to a random cowboy who'd knocked on the wrong door. "Cole," he replied, extending a calloused hand. When I shook it, his grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. "Listen, I know this is probably weird as hell, but you shouldn't be alone right now. Have you eaten anything?" I tried to remember. "Not since breakfast, yesterday." The words sounded distant, like someone else was saying them. Cole's jaw tightened. "Right, that settles it. You're coming with me." He said it with the kind of easy authority that suggested he was used to making decisions in crisis situations. I can't just," I gestured vaguely at the room, at my life in shambles. "You can, and you will," Cole said firmly but kindly. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, sitting in this room, overthinking everything, torturing yourself with questions that don't have answers, it's not gonna help. Trust me on this one." Something about the way he said "trust me" made me think he knew exactly what he was talking about. Maybe he'd been where I was standing. Maybe he understood the particular hell of loving someone who didn't love you back enough to stay. I grabbed my jacket and followed him out of the room without another word. Cole led me through the resort's main building and out a side exit I hadn't noticed before. We walked in silence along a dirt path that wound through pine trees, the evening air cool and sharp with the scent of sage and earth. My dress shoes were completely inappropriate for the terrain, but Cole adjusted his pace to match mine without comment. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said simply. After about 10 minutes, we emerged into a clearing where a small cabin sat surrounded by aspens. It was rustic, rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs, but something about it felt immediately welcoming. A border collie mix bounded off the porch, tail wagging furiously. "That's Scout," Cole said, and I watched his whole face soften as he bent to scratch behind the dog's ears. "She's terrible at guarding the place but excellent at knowing when someone needs a friend." Scout came over to investigate me, her tail still wagging. When I reached down to pet her, she leaned into my hand with her whole body, and I felt the first crack in the ice that had been coating my heart since I'd read Derek's text. "You live here?" I asked as Cole unlocked the cabin door. "For now, I'm working on one of the ranches that supplies horses to the resort. This came with the job." He held the door open for me and Scout bounded inside ahead of us. "It's not fancy, but it's mine." The interior was small but immaculately clean, one main room that served as living room and kitchen with what I assumed were a bedroom and bathroom through a door in the back. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and the furniture was simple but sturdy. What caught my attention were the books. Everywhere, stacked on shelves, piled on the coffee table, tucked into every available corner. "You read a lot," I observed, moving closer to examine the spines. I saw everything from classic literature to contemporary fiction, poetry collections to philosophy texts. Only thing that kept me sane when Cole stopped abruptly, then changed course. "Yeah, I read a lot, you hungry?" I wanted to ask him to finish that sentence, but something in his posture told me now wasn't the time. "Starving, actually." Cole moved around the small kitchen with practiced efficiency, pulling out ingredients and starting to cook. I sat at the small wooden table and watched him work, Scout settling at my feet with a contented sigh. There was something mesmerizing about the way Cole moved, economical, confident, entirely comfortable in his own skin. "So what brings a cowboy to a fancy resort?" I asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than thoughts of Derek. "Money mostly," Cole said with a self-deprecating smile. "I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, but family places like that don't make much anymore. I've been working different ranches, saving up to maybe buy some land of my own someday." He paused, checking something on the stove. "What about you? What do you do when you're not having the worst honeymoon in recorded history?" The question was light, but I appreciated that he didn't tiptoe around what had happened. "I'm a graphic designer, work for a marketing firm in San Francisco. It's fine, it pays the bills. It's not exactly following my dreams, but whose job is, right?" Cole glanced over his shoulder at me. "What are your dreams?" No one had asked me that in years. Derek certainly never had. "I wanted to be an artist," I admitted quietly. "Like a real one, painting, illustration, gallery shows, the whole impractical, starving artist thing." "What stopped you?" "Life, reality." Derek thought it was too risky, too unstable. He had a point. We needed dual income to afford the city, to save for a house, to build a life. Even as I said it, I heard how hollow it sounded. Build a life. We'd built something, all right, a beautiful facade that had crumbled the moment it was tested. Cole turned from the stove and the look he gave me was intense, almost challenging. "Sounds like you built his life, not yours." The words hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to defend Derek, old habit, then closed it again. Cole was right. How many times had I compromised, adjusted, made myself smaller to fit into Derek's vision of what our life should look like? "Sorry," Cole said, seeing my expression. "That was out of line." "I don't know you, don't know your situation." "No," I interrupted. "You're right, you're absolutely right. I just wish I'd figured that out before I married him." Cole brought over 2 plates of what turned out to be the best steak and eggs I'd ever tasted. We ate mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one, broken only by Scout's occasional hopeful whining for scraps. When we were done, Cole made coffee, strong and black, and we moved to the couch. "Can I ask you something?" I said, cradling the warm mug in my hands. "Shoot." "Earlier you said you knew sitting alone in that room wouldn't help. You said trust me, like you'd been through something similar. What happened?" Cole was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. He stared into his coffee mug like it might contain answers to questions he hadn't asked. Finally, he spoke. His name was Ryan. We were together for 3 years. I thought we were solid, had plans, talked about buying a ranch together, the whole 9 yards. Then I found out he'd been cheating on me for almost a year with a guy from his gym. "Jesus, Cole, I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but I could see the old hurt still lingering in his eyes. Worst part wasn't even the cheating, it was realizing I'd been so busy trying to be what he wanted that I'd lost track of who I was. Took me a long time to find myself again. That's why I ended up here, fresh start, new place, no history. Is it working, the fresh start? Cole looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us, recognition maybe, understanding. It was, he said softly, right up until a guy with the saddest eyes I've ever seen answered his hotel room door looking like his world had just ended. My breath caught, the air between us suddenly felt charged with something I didn't have a name for. Cole must have felt it too because he stood abruptly, walking over to the fireplace. You're welcome to stay here tonight if you want. Couch is pretty comfortable, or I can walk you back to your room, whatever you need. The thought of going back to that room with its rose petals and champagne and empty bed made me feel physically ill. Could I stay, just for tonight? Course, Cole grabbed a blanket from a chest near the door and tossed it to me. I'll get you a pillow, bathroom's through there if you need it. He pointed to the door I'd noticed earlier. As he moved around gathering bedding, I felt something shift in my chest. A warmth, a gratitude, something else I couldn't quite identify. This stranger had shown me more genuine kindness in 2 hours than Derek had in months. Cole, thank you, really, you didn't have to do any of this. He paused in the doorway to what I assumed was his bedroom, his silhouette backlit by a lamp. Yeah, I did. Nobody should face something like that alone. He hesitated, then added, plus, Scout likes you, she's a good judge of character. After he disappeared into his room, I settled onto the couch with Scout curled up at my feet. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft sound of Cole moving around in the next room. For the first time since I'd read Derek's text, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt anchored somehow in this small cabin with a cowboy I'd just met and a dog who'd adopted me. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled me under like a tide. I woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the smell of coffee. For a blissful few seconds, I forgot where I was and why. Then reality crashed back and I felt the weight of it settle on my chest. Morning, Cole said from the kitchen. He was already dressed, jeans, work shirt, boots, and was pouring coffee into 2 mugs. How'd you sleep? Better than I expected, I admitted, sitting up and running a hand through what I was sure was catastrophically messy hair. He brought me a mug and sat in the chair across from the couch. In the morning light, I got a better look at him. He had the kind of face that artists spend their lives trying to capture: strong features, expressive eyes, a mouth that looked like it smiled easily but could also set in a determined line. There was a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow that I hadn't noticed the night before. I've got to work this morning, he said, but I'm free this afternoon. I was thinking if you want I could show you around, get you out of your head for a while. You don't have to babysit me, I said, even though the thought of spending the day alone made my stomach twist. I'm inviting you to hang out because I want to. He took a sip of his coffee, watching me over the rim of the mug. Plus, you're on your honeymoon, might as well see something other than the inside of a hotel room. The word honeymoon stung, but Cole said it matter-of-factly, not tiptoeing around it. I appreciated that. Okay, yeah, I'd like that. Good, meet me at the stables around 2. He stood, draining his coffee in one long swallow. And Ethan, don't go back to that room if you don't have to. You can stay here as long as you need. After he left, I sat with my coffee and Scout, trying to figure out what I was feeling. Gratitude, definitely, relief at not being alone. But there was something else too, a flutter of something that felt dangerously like anticipation. I shut that down quickly. My marriage had just imploded. The last thing I needed was to complicate things by developing feelings for the first person to show me kindness. But when 2 o'clock came and I walked to the stables to find Cole waiting with 2 horses already saddled, his face lighting up when he saw me, I felt that flutter again. Stronger this time, harder to ignore. You ever ridden before? He asked. Once at summer camp when I was 12, I fell off. Cole laughed, a warm, rich sound that made something in my chest tighten. Well, I promise not to let that happen today. This is Honey. He gestured to a gentle-looking Palomino mare. She's about as dangerous as a house cat. I'll be right next to you on Duke. He patted the neck of a larger dark bay gelding. Getting onto the horse was awkward and ungraceful, but Cole was patient, adjusting my stirrups and making sure I was comfortable before mounting his own horse with the kind of easy athleticism that came from years of practice. We set off at a slow walk, Cole keeping Honey on a lead line at first until he was confident I had my seat. You're doing great, he said after about 10 minutes, and the genuine pride in his voice made me feel absurdly pleased. He led me along trails that wound through pine forests and across meadows dotted with wildflowers. The Montana landscape was stunning, vast and open in a way that made San Francisco feel claustrophobic in comparison. Cole pointed out landmarks, told me stories about the ranch and the horses, kept up an easy commentary that didn't require much response from me but also didn't feel like he was filling silence. After about an hour, we stopped at a ridge that overlooked a valley. The view was breathtaking: mountains in the distance, a river snaking through the landscape below, clouds casting moving shadows across the ground. "I come here when I need to think," Cole said, dismounting and helping me down from Honey. His hands on my waist were firm and steadying, and he didn't let go until he was sure I had my balance. "Helps to see things from a different perspective, makes your problems feel smaller somehow." We sat on a flat rock, the horses grazing nearby. The silence between us was comfortable, neither of us feeling the need to fill it with empty words. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said eventually. "Fair's fair, you answered my question last night. Did you love him, your husband?" I expected the question to hurt more than it did. Instead, I found myself really thinking about it. I thought I did, maybe I did in the beginning, but looking back now, I think I was more in love with the idea of being in love. Derek was safe, stable. He had his life together, knew what he wanted. I think part of me hoped that being with him would help me figure out what I wanted too. And did it? "It helped me figure out what I don't want," I said with a bitter laugh. "I don't want to be an afterthought. I don't want to compromise who I am until I'm unrecognizable. I don't want to build a life with someone who can walk away with a 3-sentence text message." Cole nodded slowly. "That's a start, knowing what you don't want." "What about you?" I turned to look at him. "What do you want?" He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the valley. "I want what my parents had. They ran a ranch together for 40 years, worked side by side every day, fought sometimes, made up, built something real. I want a partner who sees me as an equal, someone who challenges me to be better but loves me as I am. I want to wake up every morning and choose that person and have them choose me back." Yeah. The longing in his voice was palpable, and I felt it echo in my own chest. "That sounds nice." "Yeah, well," he turned to look at me, and the intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "Turns out finding that is harder than it sounds." Something hung in the air between us, unspoken, unnamed, but undeniably present. Cole looked away first, standing and offering me his hand to help me up. "We should head back before it gets dark." The ride back was quieter, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we reached the stables and Cole helped me dismount, his hands lingered on my waist just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that made my heart race, something that looked a lot like want, immediately tamped down by what looked like caution or fear. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, stepping back and putting distance between us. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it more than I should. That night back on Cole's couch with Scout at my feet, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day, Cole's laugh, the way he'd looked at me on that ridge, the feeling of his hands steadying me. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, just my emotions running high after the disaster with Derek, but I knew I was lying to myself. What I felt when I was around Cole was something I'd never felt with Derek, not even in the beginning. It was electric, terrifying, real. In the morning, I found a note on the coffee table: "Had to start early, make yourself breakfast, see you at 2 c." I spent the morning walking around the resort property trying to process everything. I should call someone, my parents, my friends, tell them what happened, but the thought of saying the words out loud, of making it real, made me feel sick. Instead, I found myself thinking about Cole, wondering what he was doing, wondering if he was thinking about me too. 2 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. This time, instead of writing, Cole took me on a hike to a waterfall he said not many people knew about. We talked more easily now, the initial awkwardness of strangers beginning to fade. He told me about growing up on his family's ranch, about how hard it had been to leave but how necessary it had felt after things ended with Ryan. I told him about my family, about how I'd always been the good son who made safe choices and followed the expected path. "You know what I think?" Cole said as we sat by the waterfall, the mist cool on our faces. "I think you've spent your whole life being what other people needed you to be. Maybe it's time to figure out who you are when nobody's watching." "That's terrifying," I admitted. "Yeah," he agreed, "but maybe that's the point. Maybe the things worth having are supposed to be a little terrifying." He was looking at me when he said it, and I couldn't shake the feeling he was talking about more than just self-discovery. The air between us felt charged again, heavy with something unspoken. I wanted to lean closer, to close the distance between us, to see if this thing I was feeling was real or just my broken heart latching onto the first person to show me kindness. But before I could do anything, before I could even figure out what I wanted to do, Cole stood, offering me his hand. "We should head back." The pattern repeated itself over the next few days. Cole would work in the mornings and we'd spend our afternoons together, riding, hiking, exploring the property, talking about everything and nothing. He showed me how to groom the horses, taught me the basics of roping. I was terrible at it, but he was patient, took me to his favorite spots on the ranch. Scout became my constant companion, following me around the cabin when Cole was at work. Every night, I'd settle onto Cole's couch and he'd retreat to his bedroom. We'd talk through the door sometimes, our conversations drifting into comfortable silence. And every night, I'd lie awake longer than I should, hyper-aware of how close he was, of how much I wanted to cross that threshold between us. I knew I was falling for him, it was impossible not to. Cole was everything Derek wasn't, present, attentive, genuinely interested in who I was rather than who he wanted me to be. But I also knew I was a mess. My marriage had ended less than a week ago. I was emotionally vulnerable, probably not thinking clearly, definitely not ready for anything new. Cole seemed to be thinking the same thing. I'd catch him looking at me sometimes with an expression that made my heart race, but then he'd look away, put distance between us, redirect the conversation. We were both dancing around something, neither of us willing to be the first to name it. On the sixth day, everything changed. We were in the barn. Cole was teaching me how to properly muck out a stall, insisting that if I was going to spend time around horses, I needed to know the unglamorous parts too. I was laughing at something he'd said, probably looking ridiculous in borrowed work clothes that were too big for me when I slipped on some loose hay. Cole caught me, one arm wrapping around my waist, the other bracing against the stall wall behind me. Suddenly we were pressed together, his face inches from mine. I could feel his heart beating as fast as my own. His eyes dropped to my lips and I saw him swallow hard. "Ethan," he said, his voice rough. It wasn't a question or a statement, it was a warning and a plea all at once. "Cole," I breathed back, one hand coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the muscles tensing beneath his shirt, could see the war playing out behind his eyes. For a moment, one perfect, suspended moment, I thought he was going to kiss me. Every cell in my body was screaming for him to kiss me. But then he stepped back, putting space between us, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I'd come to recognize as frustration. "I can't," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Ethan, I can't be someone you turn to just because you're hurting. I can't be your rebound." The words stung even though I understood where they were coming from. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is," he said, finally looking at me. "But I know you're vulnerable right now. I know you're dealing with a lot. And I know that if I cross that line with you, I'm not going to be able to uncross it. I'm going to want things you might not be ready to give." "What if I want those things too?" The words came out before I could stop them. Cole's expression was agonized. "You don't know what you want. You're hurt and lost and looking for something to hold onto. I get that, I do, but I won't be your anchor, Ethan, not like this, not when you're just trying to forget someone else." "This isn't about Derek," I said, surprised by how true it felt. "I'm not trying to forget him, I'm trying to figure out who I am without him, and when I'm with you I feel more like myself than I have in years." "That's exactly my point," Cole said softly. "You're figuring yourself out, you need space to do that, not to jump into something new with the first guy who's nice to you. You think I'd feel this way about anyone who showed me kindness? You think what I'm feeling is just gratitude?" I was getting angry now, frustrated by his refusal to see what was right in front of us. "I think you're not in a place to know the difference," Cole said, "and I care about you too much to take advantage of that." "Too much?" I latched onto the phrase. "You care about me." Cole closed his eyes like he was in pain. "Of course I care about you, how could I not? But that's exactly why we can't, why I can't," he broke off, shaking his head. "I need some air." He walked out of the barn, leaving me standing there in borrowed clothes that smelled like hay and horses, my heart hammering against my ribs. Scout whined from where she'd been watching us, trotting over to lean against my leg in comfort. "I screwed that up, didn't I, girl?" I murmured, scratching behind her ears. I didn't see Cole the rest of that day. When I got back to the cabin in the evening, there was another note: "Staying at the main ranch tonight, you can stay at the cabin. See." The message was clear, he needed distance. And maybe he was right, maybe I was too much of a mess to know what I really felt. Maybe I was just transferring my need for connection onto the first person who made me feel seen. But lying on his couch that night, surrounded by his books and his scent in his absence, I knew that wasn't true. What I felt for Cole wasn't about Derek, wasn't about rebound or gratitude or convenience. It was about the way my heart raced when I heard his laugh, the way the world felt more vivid when he was near, the way I'd started imagining a future I'd never let myself consider before, one where I was seen, chosen, cherished for exactly who I was. I was falling in love with him, maybe I'd already fallen. And he'd just made it crystal clear that he couldn't, let himself feel the same way. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I made a decision. Cole was right about one thing: I needed to figure out who I was and what I wanted, but I couldn't do that while staying in his space, using his kindness as a crutch. I needed to stand on my own. I gathered my few belongings and wrote my own note: "Thank you for everything. You were right. I need to figure things out on my own. I'm going back to the hotel. Take care of yourself, Cole. E." Walking back to the resort felt like the longest journey of my life. Part of me wanted to run back to the cabin, to wait for Cole to return, to fight for whatever was growing between us. But I knew he'd just push me away again. And maybe he was right too. Maybe I was too broken, too confused, too recent from a failed marriage to be trusted with his heart. The hotel had moved me to a different room. I'd requested it, unable to face the honeymoon suite again. This one was smaller, simpler, without any romantic touches. I spent the day on the phone, finally making the calls I'd been avoiding. My parents were shocked but supportive. My best friend Sarah was furious on my behalf, offering to fly out immediately, though I told her not to. I even called a lawyer, starting the process of annulment. With each call, each practical step forward, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. My marriage to Derek was really over. The life I'd been building was gone, but instead of terrifying me, it felt oddly freeing. Like Cole had said, maybe I'd been living someone else's life for so long that I'd forgotten what mine looked like. I spent the next 2 days alone, doing a lot of thinking. I sketched for the first time in months, years, really filling pages with landscapes of Montana, with horses and barns and a certain cowboy's profile when I thought I could capture it. The drawings were rough, unpracticed, but they felt honest. They felt like mine. On the third day, I saw Cole from a distance at the resort restaurant. He was with a group of ranch hands, laughing at something someone said. Even from across the room, the sight of him made my heart ache. He looked tired, I thought, or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Maybe he was fine, maybe he'd already forgotten about me. As if feeling my gaze, he looked up. Our eyes met across the crowded restaurant. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he gave me a small nod, acknowledgement maybe, or goodbye. I nodded back and forced myself to look away, to let him go, even though everything in me wanted to cross that room and tell him exactly how I felt. That night, lying in my hotel bed, I made another decision. My honeymoon package had 3 more days. I could spend them hiding in this room, or I could actually see Montana. Not with Cole, he'd made his position clear, but on my own, for myself. The next morning, I rented a car and drove. No destination, no plan. Just me and the open road and a landscape that was beginning to feel less foreign and more like possibility. I stopped at small towns, talked to locals, took pictures and filled more sketchbooks. I hiked trails and sat by streams and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back: the grief, the anger, the fear, the strange bubbling hope that maybe this ending was actually a beginning. On what should have been my last night in Montana, I found myself driving back toward the ranch. I told myself I was just taking one last look at the landscape, but I knew I was lying. I wanted to see Cole, needed to see him, even if he didn't want to see me. The cabin looked empty when I drove past, but I saw smoke coming from the chimney. I parked on the side of the road, sat in the car for 15 minutes arguing with myself, and finally worked up the courage to knock on the door. Cole answered, looking like he'd been through his own private hell. Unshaven, hair messy, wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Ethan." "Hi," my voice came out smaller than I intended. "Can we talk?" He hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. Scout immediately bounded over, tail wagging frantically. At least someone was happy to see me. We stood awkwardly in the middle of the cabin, the same space where I'd spent nearly a week, feeling more at home than I had in my expensive San Francisco apartment. The same space where I'd started to figure out who I was when no one was telling me who to be. "I leave tomorrow," I said, breaking the silence. "My flight's at noon." Cole nodded, his jaw tight. "Probably for the best." "Yeah, probably." I took a breath, gathering courage. "But before I go, I need to say something. You can tell me I'm wrong, that I'm confused, that I don't know what I'm feeling, but I need to say it anyway." "Ethan." "You were right," I interrupted. I was a mess when we met. I was lost and hurting and probably not thinking clearly, but these past few days being away from you, having space to think, it didn't make things clearer. It made things harder because I realized something. What? His voice was barely above a whisper. What I feel for you isn't about Derek. It's not about being hurt or needing someone to save me. You made me feel seen, Cole, not like a project or an idea or a role to fill. You saw me, the messy, confused, scared parts and the parts I'd forgotten existed. You made me want to be braver, to figure out who I am and what I want. And what I want, my voice cracked. What I want is to see where this could go with you. Cole stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. You're leaving tomorrow. I know, but that doesn't change how I feel. And how do you feel? He asked it like he was afraid of the answer. I stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his honey-colored eyes, close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat. I feel like I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I feel like when I'm with you, I'm the person I've always wanted to be but was too scared to become. I feel like falling for you is the first honest thing I've done in years. Falling, he breathed the word like it hurt. Fallen, whatever verb tense you want to use. My hands were shaking. I'm in love with you, Cole. Maybe that's too fast, too soon, too crazy given the circumstances, but it's true, and I needed you to know before I leave. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then, moving slowly like he was giving me time to pull away, he reached up and cupped my face in his calloused hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, and I saw his eyes search mine for any sign of doubt or hesitation. I'm going to kiss you now, he said quietly. And if you're not sure, if there's any part of you that's doing this for the wrong reasons, you need to tell me to stop. Don't stop, I whispered. Cole kissed me like I was something precious he'd been afraid he might break. Soft at first, questioning, and then deeper when I pressed closer and answered with everything I felt. His hands slid from my face to my hair to my back, pulling me against him, and I felt 7 days of tension and longing and denial break open between us. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against mine. I'm terrified, he admitted. I'm terrified you'll wake up tomorrow and realize this was a mistake. Terrified I'm just a chapter in your story, something you needed to heal before moving on. You're not, I said firmly. Cole, you're not a chapter, you're... I struggled to find words big enough. Your possibility, you're what happens when I'm brave enough to be honest about what I want. And what do you want? He asked again, like he needed to hear me say it one more time. You, this, a chance to figure out what we could be. I pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I know the logistics are complicated. I know I live in San Francisco and you're here. I know I'm technically still married even though the annulment is in process. But I also know that I don't want to walk away from this from you without at least trying. Cole was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing absent patterns on my back. I spent 3 days trying to convince myself you'd be better off without me, that I'd be taking advantage of your vulnerability, that the right thing to do was let you go. He smiled ruefully. Turns out I'm not noble enough to do the right thing, not when it comes to you. So don't let me go, I said simply. How, Ethan, your life is in California, mine is here at least for now. Even if we wanted this, and God, I want this, how would we even make it work? I don't know, I admitted. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to have it all figured out right now. Maybe we just need to decide it's worth trying to figure out. Cole kissed me again, and this time there was something different in it, not just desire but decision. Stay, he said against my lips. Don't leave tomorrow. Stay a few more days. Let's see what this is when we're not fighting against it. I can't. I have to get back to work to deal with the separation too. I stopped, hearing my own words. The same excuses I'd been making for years, the same prioritization of obligation over what I actually wanted. Actually, you know what? Screw that, I'm calling in sick. I've got vacation days, work can wait. Cole's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. Yeah, I'm staying. We spent that night talking, really talking. Cole told me about his dreams for the future, about the land he wanted to buy and the horses he wanted to raise and the life he wanted to build. I told him about the art I'd stopped making, about the person I'd been before I'd learned to make myself smaller, about the terrifying exhilaration of not knowing what came next but wanting to find out anyway. We fell asleep on the couch together, my head on his chest, his arm around my shoulders, Scout curled up at our feet. It was innocent, comfortable, right in a way that made my heart ache with how much I'd been missing without knowing it. The next few days felt like existing in a bubble outside of time. Cole took time off work, something he said he never did, and we spent every moment together. He taught me to ride better, to rope I was still terrible, to appreciate the particular silence of a Montana dawn. I showed him my sketches, and he looked at them like they were masterpieces, asking questions about technique and inspiration that no one had ever bothered to ask before. We kissed a lot, stolen moments in the barn, deliberate embraces in the cabin, soft touches that promised more without demanding it. Cole was patient with me, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, seeming content just to hold me and talk and exist in the same space. I keep waiting for this to feel wrong, I admitted one evening as we sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset. Like I should feel guilty or confused or like I'm moving too fast, but I don't, I just feel right. Good, Cole said, pressing a kiss to my temple. Because I stopped feeling guilty about wanting you approximately 5 minutes after you showed up at my door again. Just 5 minutes. I needed a minute to be dramatic about it first. I laughed, turning to kiss him properly. We stayed on that porch until the stars came out and Cole pointed out constellations, and I felt more at peace than I had in years. But eventually, reality had to intrude. I couldn't stay in Montana indefinitely as much as I wanted to. I had a life in San Francisco, a messy one that needed dealing with, but mine nonetheless. After a week of living in our bubble, I had to face the fact that I needed to go home. Come with me, I said the night before my rescheduled flight. We were lying in bed. I'd graduated from the couch a few days earlier, and I had my head on his chest listening to his heartbeat. Just for a week or two, see the city, meet my friends, let me show you my world. Cole's hand stilled where it had been tracing patterns on my back. Ethan, I can't just leave, I have responsibilities here, commitments. I know, I'm not asking you to abandon your life just to visit mine. I propped myself up to look at him. I need to go back, I need to deal with the divorce, with work, with putting my life back together, but I want you to be part of that life, Cole. I want to find a way to make this work. He searched my face and I saw the fear there, fear of being hurt again, fear of taking a risk, fear of hopping. What if it doesn't work? What if you get back to your real life and realize I don't fit? What if you do? I countered. Cole, I could spend my whole life playing it safe, making choices based on what might go wrong. I did that with Derek and look how that turned out. Or I could be brave, I could choose you, I could choose to believe that what we have is worth fighting for. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. I kissed him softly. I love you, you love me, don't try to deny it, I can see it in everything you do, the rest is just logistics, and logistics can be figured out. Cole pulled me closer, burying his face in my neck. I do love you, he said, the words muffled but clear. God help me, I fell in love with you when you were still wearing your wedding ring and too sad to see straight. I'm terrified of what that means. Me too, I admitted. But maybe that's how you know it's real. Maybe love is supposed to be a little terrifying. We talked through the night, making plans, acknowledging obstacles, deciding to try despite not having all the answers. By the time morning came, we had the skeleton of a plan. I'd go back to San Francisco and deal with my immediate responsibilities. Cole would tie up loose ends at the ranch and ask for some time off. In 2 weeks, he'd come visit. We'd take it from there, one step at a time. Saying goodbye at the airport was harder than I expected. Cole held me tight, his face pressed against my hair, and I felt him memorizing the moment the same way I was. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, I echoed. Cole, thank you for seeing me, for being patient with me, for taking a chance on me even when it scared you. Thank you for being brave enough to come back, he said, for fighting for this even when I was too afraid to. The flight back to San Francisco felt surreal. I was returning to the same city I'd left as a newlywed, but I was a completely different person. Somewhere in Montana, between devastating heartbreak and unexpected love, I'd found myself. Or maybe I'd created myself, the version of me I'd always wanted to be but had been too scared to become. The next 2 weeks were chaos. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Derek. Thankfully, he was staying with friends and I didn't have to see him. I met with lawyers and signed papers and started the official process of ending a marriage that had been over long before it legally ended. I went back to work and faced the pitying looks and awkward questions with as much grace as I could manage. But I also did something else. I quit my job. Or rather, I gave notice, negotiating a transition to freelance work that would let me have more flexibility. I wasn't sure where I'd end up, San Francisco, Montana, somewhere else entirely, but I knew I wanted the freedom to make that choice when the time came. I also started painting again, really painting, not just sketches. I rented a small studio space and filled it with canvases. Most of them were terrible, years of not practicing had taken their toll, but I didn't care. They were mine, they were honest. They were me choosing art over safety, passion over practicality. Sarah came over one evening, a bottle of wine in hand, and looked at the paintings covering every surface. "You're different," she observed. "Not just the breakup different, something else." "I fell in love," I admitted. "With a cowboy in Montana. I know how it sounds." "It sounds like you're happy," she interrupted, "which is more than I could have said about you with Derek even before everything fell apart." She pulled me into a hug. "Tell me about him." So I did. I told her about Cole, about his kindness and his caution, about how he'd saved me and then pushed me away and then let me back in. About how being with him felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. About how terrifying and exhilarating it was to love someone when you weren't sure how the logistics would work out. "Does he know you quit your job?" Sarah asked. "Not yet. I wanted to tell him in person." She smiled. "You're really doing this. You're choosing him." "I'm choosing me," I corrected. "Cole is part of that choice, but he's not all of it. I'm choosing to be brave, to make art, to build a life that's actually mine. Cole fits into that life, he makes it better, but it's my life first." 2 weeks felt like forever, but finally Cole's flight landed at SFO. I'd been nervous about how he'd fit into my world, whether the connection we'd found in Montana would survive the transition to my reality. But when I saw him walking through the airport, looking slightly overwhelmed and completely out of place in his jeans and boots and cowboy hat, all my doubts evaporated. He saw me and smiled, that same warm smile that had made me feel seen from the very first day, and I ran to him like something out of a movie. He caught me, lifting me off my feet, and kissed me in the middle of the crowded airport like we were the only two people in the world. "Hi," he said when we finally pulled apart, both of us grinning like idiots. "Hi yourself, cowboy, welcome to San Francisco." The next week was a revelation. I showed Cole my city, the good parts and the messy ones, and watched him experience it with fresh eyes. He loved the ocean, tolerated the crowds, was bemused by the food scene, and charmed by the architecture. My friends adored him, particularly Sarah, who pulled me aside at a dinner party to whisper, "If you don't marry this man, I will." But more than showing him San Francisco, I showed him my new life, the studio I'd rented, the paintings I'd been working on, the freelance contracts I'd negotiated, the version of myself I was building. "You did all this in 2 weeks?" he asked, looking at the canvases with something like awe. "I did all this because of you," I corrected. "You made me brave enough to try." Cole pulled me close, his arms wrapping around my waist from behind as we stood looking at my work. "You were always brave, Ethan, you just needed permission to be." That night in my apartment, not the one I'd shared with Derek, but a new smaller one in a different neighborhood, we finally took the step we'd been dancing around since Montana. Cole made love to me like I was precious, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment, and I felt pieces of myself that had been broken slot back into place. Afterward, lying tangled together in my bed, I felt more whole than I had in years. "I have something to tell you," I said into the darkness. "Should I be worried?" Cole's voice was sleepy content. "I quit my job, well, mostly, I'm going freelance." I felt him tense slightly. "When did you decide this?" "The day I got back. I've been waiting to tell you in person." I turned to look at him. "I wanted to make this decision for me, not because of you, but I also wanted you to know that I'm serious about this, about us. I'm making room in my life for this to work." Cole was quiet for a moment, then he kissed my forehead gently. "I gave notice at the ranch. My last day is in 3 weeks. "You what?" "I've been saving money for years, remember? I've got enough to buy some land, start my own small operation. I was thinking," he paused, nervous. "I was thinking maybe somewhere between here and Montana. Oregon maybe, Northern California, somewhere you could still have access to a city but I could have land, somewhere we could both build the lives we want." I propped myself up on my elbow to look at him properly. "You do that? Compromise on location." "It's not a compromise if it gets me you and a future I actually want." He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "I spent a week in your city, Ethan. I saw how you light up when you talk about art, how happy you are in that studio, how much you love the ocean. I can't ask you to give all that up to live on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, but maybe we can find something in between, something that's ours." I kissed him then, deep and slow and full of promise. "When do we start looking?" "How about tomorrow?" Cole suggested, pulling me closer. but right now I just want to be here with you in this moment." We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and I dreamed of a future that was still unwritten but full of possibility. A future with land and horses and a studio with good light. A future where I painted and Cole built something real and we chose each other every single day. 6 months later, we stood on 20 acres in southern Oregon, watching movers unload a combination of Cole's practical furniture and my art supplies. The property had a small house that needed work, a barn that needed more work, and a view that took my breath away every time I saw it. Scout raced around the property, deliriously happy to have space to run. Cole wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me against his side. "You sure about this?" he asked, though he was smiling. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said honestly. And it was true. The last 6 months had been hard work, navigating the end of my marriage, building a freelance career, helping Cole plan his ranch, finding this property, making 1,000 tiny decisions about how to blend our lives together. But it had also been the happiest 6 months of my life. "Hey, Ethan." "Yes." "Thank you for knocking on the wrong door." I laughed. "That was you, remember, you knocked on my door." "Best mistake I ever made," Cole said, then kissed me in the middle of our land, in front of our house, with our dog running circles around us and our whole future stretching out ahead. Sometimes I think about that honeymoon suite in Montana, the rose petals, the champagne, the perfect romantic setup that turned into the worst night of my life. And I'm grateful. Grateful that Derek left, grateful that I was broken open enough to let someone see the real me, grateful that a cowboy knocked on the wrong door at exactly the right time. I thought my story ended when Derek walked away, but really it was just beginning. A year later, I had my first gallery show, a series of paintings inspired by Montana landscapes and second chances. Cole was there, uncomfortable in dress clothes but proud, his hand in mine as strangers walked around looking at my work. Several pieces sold, and one reviewer called my work raw and honest, with an emotional depth that suggests an artist who's lived through something transformative. They had no idea how right they were. 2 years later, Cole's ranch was thriving, small but successful, with a reputation for well-trained horses and ethical practices. I'd built a studio on the property with huge windows and northern light, and I worked there every day while Cole worked with the horses. We'd adopted 2 more dogs to keep Scout company, and on weekends we'd ride together through our land, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. My divorce from Derek had been finalized after a year of paperwork and negotiations. He tried to reach out once to apologize, to explain, but I'd declined to meet. There was nothing he could say that would change what had happened, and I'd moved so far past that version of myself that his apology felt irrelevant. I hoped he'd found whatever he was looking for. I knew I had. 3 years later, on a perfect autumn evening with the aspens turning gold and the air crisp with the promise of winter, Cole and I stood in our barn, the same barn where he'd caught me when I slipped, where we'd almost kissed for the first time, where everything had started to shift between us. He took my hand, and I noticed he was nervous, which was unusual for Cole. He was confident with horses, with land, with building things. Nervousness wasn't his natural state. "I've been thinking," he started, then stopped, shaking his head. "No, that's not right, let me start over." He took a breath. "Ethan, you walked into my life at what should have been my loneliest moment. Instead, it became the moment everything started making sense. You've made me braver, pushed me to be better, built a life with me that's more than I ever dreamed of. And I wake up every morning still amazed that I get to love you." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and my heart started racing. "I know we did things backward, fell in love before we even properly dated, built a life before we really knew each other, but that's us, isn't it? We've never done anything the traditional way." He opened the box to reveal 2 simple silver bands. "So I'm asking you the traditional way. Ethan, will you marry me?" I thought about that honeymoon suite 3 years ago, about rose petals and an absent husband and a text message that shattered my world, about a cowboy who knocked on the wrong door and showed me what love was supposed to feel like, about the person I'd been and the person I'd become. "Yes," I said, my voice strong and sure. "Yes, Cole, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on my finger, and I kissed him in the same barn where we'd almost kissed years ago, where we'd been too afraid of what we felt to give into it. We weren't afraid anymore. We got married 6 months later in our field, surrounded by friends and family and horses and dogs. It was nothing like my first wedding, no expensive venue, no elaborate decorations, no pretense of perfection. Just 2 men promising to choose each other, to build something real, to be brave enough to love honestly. My vows made Cole cry, his made me laugh. We both promised to keep knocking on the right doors even when we were scared, especially when we were scared. Sarah was my best person, giving a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. Cole's father, who'd made the trip from Wyoming, gave a toast about how proud he was that his son had found what he and Cole's mother had, a real partnership, a true love. That night, in our house on our land with our life spread out around us, Cole held me close and whispered, "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who didn't know what he was doing." "Thank you for saving me," I whispered back. "I didn't save you, you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land while you figured it out." Maybe that was true. Maybe I'd needed to break completely before I could build myself back better. Maybe Derek leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it hadn't felt that way at the time, maybe sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find the right path. All I knew for certain was this: I'd been betrayed on my honeymoon and saved by a cowboy. But more than that, I'd saved myself. I'd learned to be brave, to make art, to choose love even when it was terrifying. I'd learned that sometimes the wrong door leads to the right place, that sometimes the end of one story is the beginning of a better one. And I'd learned that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't happen in perfect honeymoon suites with rose petals and champagne. It happens in messy barns and small cabins, over late-night conversations and shared dreams, with someone who sees you at your worst and chooses to stay anyway. 5 years after Derek left me in that Montana resort, Cole and I were sitting on our porch watching the sunset, the same way we'd spent countless evenings since we built our life together. I had paint under my fingernails from a day in the studio. Cole had hay in his hair from working with a new horse. Scout and our other dogs were sprawled at our feet, content and tired from a day of running. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked suddenly, "taking a chance on me, upending your whole life?" I looked at him, at this man who'd shown me what love could be, who'd been patient with my healing, who'd built a life with me that was more than either of us had dreamed possible. "Not for a single second," I said honestly. "Do you?" "Never," he said, pulling me closer. "Best wrong door I ever knocked on." We sat there as the sun set over our land, over the life we'd built, over the future still unfolding before us. And I thought about how strange life was, how the worst thing that ever happened to me had led to the best thing. How being betrayed had taught me what real love looked like. How a 3-sentence text message had been the push I needed to find myself. I never thanked Derek for leaving, but sometimes in quiet moments like this I was grateful that he did. Because if he hadn't, I never would have found Cole. I never would have found myself. I never would have learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain everything that matters. "Hey Ethan," Cole said softly. "Yes. I love you." "I love you too, cowboy." And in that moment, with the sun setting and the dogs sleeping and the man I loved beside me, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not in spite of what had happened, but because of it. Not despite the betrayal, but through it. Not running from my past, but grateful for the journey that had led me here. Sometimes the best love stories start with endings. Sometimes you have to be broken before you can be whole. Sometimes a cowboy knocks on your door at exactly the right moment and shows you what your life could be if you're brave enough to choose it. And sometimes, just sometimes, betrayal is really just redirection. The universe's way of pushing you toward the life you were always meant to live, with the person you were always meant to love. I'd been betrayed on my honeymoon and saved by a cowboy, but really I'd saved myself. Cole had just shown me how. And that made all the difference.